Hello and Happy New Year. It is so exciting to see how many of you are joining us from all across the United States, and we have many people joining us from even other countries. So welcome everyone. In today's webinar, we're going to be highlighting a new online simulation for virtual team building. This simulation also provides support for developing constructive teams, leaders, and cultures. This new simulation is our digital subarctic survival situation. Plus, we're excited to have two guest speakers who will be sharing their case studies and their experiences in using the simulation. For nearly 50 years, Human Synergistics has been a global leader in organizational development, leadership solutions, and team building simulations. I'm Mary McCulloch, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Mary Kay Hughes. We are delighted you're here. Let's get started. So 2020 brought an enormous amount of change to all of our lives, and that was especially so in the workplace. One day, many of us are working from home. Many of us are working from our offices. And then within days, even sometimes the next day, we're working at home with all that entails. This enormous shift provided leaders and teams with an opportunity to reflect on what are our strengths and what challenges do we need to address, and revisit some of our goals and top priorities. This has led to an ability to really think about new ways to adapt, innovate, collaborate to find new solutions. Our agenda today is we're going to kick off with an overview of the digital subarctic simulation. Then we'll have our two guest speakers share their case studies. So we have Mark Richards and Gail Moat. After each of their stories, we will have a brief Q&A session. So please submit any questions that you would like directly to Mark or Gail, and we'll cover as many of those as we can. We'll also share some exciting news about a webinar drawing at the end of the webinar. A couple of housekeeping reminders. Please use the questions field when you're submitting your questions. And lastly, because many of us are working from home, if there's any connectivity differences or delays, we ask for your patience. We will resolve those as quickly as we can. So let's start with a poll. So our first poll we'd like to ask is, what are your team development priorities for this year? So you'll see here on the poll, there's a number of options. Feel free to answer one or all of them if they apply. We'll give you just a few moments here. I see lots of responses coming in. Give you a few moments to answer, and then we'll look at the results. Great, lots of activity. Give you a few more seconds. And we'll go ahead and wrap it up here in about 3 seconds. So get any final submissions in. Great. So let's look at the results. Wow. So a landslide on increasing team collaboration and communication at 76%. Next is the supporting greater adaptability and agility. Boy, we're all being challenged with that on so many aspects. I do find it interesting. There's not as much of a need right now for starting new teams. And I guess that makes sense. We're just adapting to our current teams. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your feedback on your priorities. And we believe that through this webinar, you'll gain some insights, hopefully, to help you with your priorities. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mary Kay, who will provide an overview of the simulation.
Thanks, Mary. There are many team building tools in the market today, in human synergistics has been applying our research for nearly 50 years. So why do a team building simulation? The digital subarctic really puts participants in an unfamiliar situation in order to solve a problem. It helps participants to understand and practice behaviors that contribute to effective decision making. The simulation is ideal for intact teams at all organizational levels, newly formed teams, cross-functional teams, and of course, virtual teams. So what makes a team successful? Well, the answer is synergy. Let's start with a quick definition. When the interactive efforts of two or more people have a greater impact than the sum of their independent efforts. So to put that in simple terms, two heads are better than one. Groups do not automatically achieve synergy, yet synergy is what most managers expect when they ask people to work together. In the digital subarctic, synergy is achieved when the team outperforms its best member. I'd like you to take a moment and think about a team that you are currently a member of. How effective do you think the team is? Here on the screen is the synergistic problem-solving model. The model really provides a framework for helping teams make effective decisions. The formula is both simple and complex. An effective solution equals both quality and acceptance. Problems are solved more effectively when the group members exhibit constructive interaction styles rather than defensive interaction styles, maximizing the available knowledge, resources, and skills of the entire team. The key is that constructive styles support synergy. The model also focuses on both the rational and the interpersonal skills. The rational skills involve thinking a problem through to a solution. Things like, do I have a clear understanding of the problem? What are the objectives? What are the goals? Have I looked at some alternative strategies? Can I break the problem down into some smaller pieces? On the other side of the model are the interpersonal skills, and those really involve how well we work with others and contribute to the acceptance of our team solution. Things like, are we actively listening? Do we support? And are we able to build on other people's ideas within the team? Can we have a difference of opinion and still present it in a constructive way? Are we encouraging everybody in the team to participate? And can we find a solution that everybody can live with? In organizations, members are less likely to implement a decision if they don't accept it. So it's really critical that all members on the team agree with and support the group decision. Applying both the rational and the interpersonal skills really help to ensure that the outcome is an effective solution for everyone. So let's take a look at how we strengthen development across the organization. Let's first look at in team development. It's essential for team members to become aware of their group styles and patterns of behavior that can really help or hinder their effectiveness. When teams identify those patterns, they can really target those specific behaviors for development and continue to practice and get better at them. In leadership development, the efforts at the individual and the team level really become mutually exclusive, reinforcing to strengthen the effectiveness of the leader. And in organizational change or in organizational culture, the constructive changes at the team level really can initiate and reshape those cultural norms that exist within every organization. So let's explore what's included in the digital subarctic platform. The platform is easy to use and enables virtual facilitation when used with a video conferencing app like Teams or with Zoom. Included on the platform is access to resources and materials for the facilitator to really be able to run an effective session. The situation video provides added media support and really lets the participants experience what it looks like and feels like to be a part of that simulation. We also have another video with the experts ranking and rationale included as well. The prep guide gives guidance to set up the session and really provides facilitation tips and best practices for the facilitator. The facilitator script provides step-by-step talking points throughout the simulation. And then the team debriefing PowerPoint really ties the simulation all together. Two great features that make this platform super easy to use for virtual facilitation is the drag and drop feature. It provides an easy way to arrange your individual and your team ranking scores. And then the real-time scoring provides immediate feedback for the team metrics so you can compare each team to each other. An important goal of the simulation is to really help you understand and practice the behaviors that contribute to effective problem solving. So let's walk through how the digital subarctic process works. Your group is facing a potentially life-threatening situation. Your team is flying over Canada when your plane suddenly crashes. Don't worry, you survive and your team, and you're able to salvage 15 items from the wreckage that you will rank in order of importance to your survival and your team's survival, ranking first as an individual and then coming together as a team and providing a team ranking. Once you've completed your team ranking, the facts are provided by the expert as well as the ranking and rationale for each of the items. This really provides a benchmark to compare your individual and your team scores. The scores are provided automatically, which really gives immediate feedback on your team's performance. Team gains awareness about the way they approach the task and how they interact with one another on the team. Some teams achieve synergy, really maintaining and maximizing the knowledge of everyone within the group. However, many teams do not achieve synergy, and this really provides an opportunity for development. The process takes about 2 hours to complete, which includes both the scoring and the debriefing, but the timeline can always be flexed to accommodate your program objectives or content. So let's get to our first case study. Our first case study today focuses on creating an inclusive culture. It is my pleasure to introduce Mark Richards, the founder of the Crucible Group. Most recently, Mark was the Director of Leadership Development for Northwestern Mutual. Additionally, Mark is a Lieutenant Colonel in the Army Reserve with over 22 years of experience. He is also on the faculty of the Army's Command and General Staff College. We are very excited to have him with us today. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Mary. It's great to be here. Thanks, everybody. One example in my previous role as the Senior Director of Leadership Development, oftentimes I would get phone calls from offices around the nation saying, hey, we really wanted to focus in on this issue or this problem or what have you. So it was quite frequent that I would either give presentations or we would facilitate a program for those offices. And obviously with last year's change and so many of these things went to virtual, those in-person collaboration sessions or facilitations just couldn't happen. And so as I was having these continued conversations where I would say, okay, hey, what's the issue you're wanting to work on? What do you want to see differently? How do you want people to behave differently? There was a significant amount of fact finding, and this arrow that's kind of on the right-hand side was just kind of the framework with which I would make sure those sessions were structured. And so I would always want to make sure I opened with some sort of a story or something to get everybody into an affective kind of state of mind. I would make sure I shared some facts and data to help make sure people were grounded in what we were going to talk about and what its benefit was. I'd then share some skills and then have an opportunity to apply those skills to give everybody some practice. And the digital subarctic really gave me an opportunity to use that as a way for application after we would talk about skill building. And so oftentimes I was getting calls from people about communication skills, listening, team building, problem solving, or even culture. So the example I want to share with you today is from a team in Boston, and my buddy calls him and says, Mark, you know, it's the way they talk in South Boston. They say, Mark, I got a problem. But what he had just gotten back was the culture results. We'd done every 2 years of every office, and they get the results back and they have an opportunity to compare it. And there's a lot of conversation, not obviously just within my previous role, but nationally right now, like, hey, we need to create more diverse cultures and more inclusive cultures. Okay, well, what is that? How do we do that? Like, how do you create a culture that is more inclusive? And so as I'm having this exploratory conversation with them, I'm like, okay, well, talk to me about your results. What are you seeing? And what do you want to focus on? Or what would you like to see different? And so it really came down to this, okay, hey, I don't know, how do we create an inclusive culture? And, you know, how are we supposed to build psychological safety? And so we talked about communication skills, listening skills, problem solving skills, right? And how do we make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be heard? How do we make sure everybody has an opportunity to contribute to it? How do we make sure that those that think they have all of the answers can take patience and listen to the diversity of experiences and perspectives in the room, right? And how can we do that in a way that still brings people together, creates a little bit of fun, but also gives them an opportunity to see some of the skills that we were going to give them in real time. And so the leadership team was about 20 from 4 different offices in the greater Boston area that we all had virtually get together for this 2-hour meeting. And so we made sure we kind of reviewed, okay, what are the areas of the culture survey we want to focus on? We're going to really take some time to think about listening and questioning skills. And then we're going to connect those behaviors to how they're going to be able to contribute to the results. So we can head over to the next slide. So some of the things we really focused on in those skills, but also kind of the educational aspect, is the aspect of listening and recognizing that oftentimes when a problem is delivered in front of us, we usually are, you know, waiting to respond because we've got an idea. And instead of saying, well, what do you think? Let me hear what you understand this to be. What things are you thinking about? How do we make sure we're listening to what the people are telling us? Oftentimes, we have to have some creative ideas that have never been done before and may test our risk tolerances, right? So we may feel a little uncomfortable about that. So, hey, how do you not shut an idea down, right? And say, help me understand your thinking, or, you know, where are you getting that idea from, or where do you think that will go? And take a more inquisitive mind as opposed to shutting things down. Recognizing that there's going to be differences of opinion. And the digital subarctic provides plenty of opportunities to have these differences exposed, because in the rankings, I individually rank them one way and you individually rank them another way. And now we've got to try and find that synergy that was being talked about earlier. And so we're going to have differences of opinion, and how do we navigate that while listening to each other and supporting those differences that happen? We also make sure that in these small group environments, how do we make sure everybody has an opportunity to participate and hear the idea that maybe we hadn't thought about, but the other person isn't as senior or doesn't have a formal leadership role on the team, but how do we make sure that their voice gets included? So making sure that everybody's brought into it. And then the consensus isn't necessarily group thing, right? We want to avoid everybody just saying, yep, whatever you say, you're the leader, you're the boss. Like, no. We've talked about this, we've discussed it, we've gone through it. Now we're going to go with this answer. So we make sure we highlighted why these things are important and how do you go about doing them, and saying, look, the key to your success moving forward into the simulation is your ability to do all 5 of these things really well. If you do them well and focus on the skills that we just gave you, you're going to have better success in the simulation. So on the next slide, some of the things we talked about with regards to listening was also the aspect of how do you ask good questions? And oftentimes there's closed-ended questions like, all right, well, who did you talk to? How much? You know, what did this cost? Where did you find that, right? It's very transactional. Whereas we wanted to open up their ability to better understand, okay, what do those exploratory conversations and questions look like? All right, so can you help me understand why you think that's the best option? Mindful of tone, right? So that we're not just saying, well, are you crazy? What do you think? So what do you think it should be, right? What are the priorities, you know, what are the priorities that we establish so that we can make sure we're staying focused here? Or how will that help us? So being much more interested in what everybody else is thinking to then figure out, okay, how do we come together as a, and the simulation puts them under a time crunch. So there is a stressful environment of how fast we have to be able to do things. So the great thing about this is, yes, they're going to learn these new skills, but they're going to learn it in a stressful environment, which is very emblematic of the normal work environment that we see every single day. So we try and make sure that we feed them some new questions that they can have in their arsenal when they get into the simulation. So the next slide. So we talked about, okay, hey, you want to build an inclusive culture. That's really going to be incumbent upon your ability to listen to other people, to entertain differing opinions, to ask better questions. And now, hey, here's some tools that we're going to give you. Now we're going to go through the 90-minute simulation to give you a chance to put that to the use. And then we're going to talk about it. Okay, why did you have these kinds of results? What did you see? What were the conversations you had in your group? Okay, and they had a better awareness of how maybe biting your tongue, or if you're, you know, usually the one that's always speaking first, how does that help by you not speaking first and allowing other people to go? The other aspect is, especially with the topic of culture and especially inclusivity right now, oftentimes it feels like a lecture to people. And the great thing about this is say, hey, we're going to give you some skills and we're going to have you an opportunity to put it in here. And it's all about how do we work better together as a team. And you can experience that as opposed to me telling it to you. And all I'm going to do at the end is help mine for those really great nuggets that happened organically during the simulation. And we make sure that the groups are small enough in which everybody gets an opportunity to contribute and share. And one of the other benefits is, especially in this virtual environment, those social interactions, those conversations that happen organically about how's your family and what'd you do this weekend and what's going on in your personal life, those things tend to kind of go away a little bit. This provides a nice, great opportunity for people to kind of connect again on a personal level. Next slide. So here are just some ideas. You know, if you're thinking about using this with your teams or with other leaders, or you've already tried it, some things that I learned, and Gail has got some other really great tips for you, but things I learned is to, when you buy the credits, buy an extra one for yourself as the facilitator, so you have the participant view up on one screen, and then you've got the facilitator portal up on the other. And so that just helped me keep track of what are the participants seeing, so I can comment on that as opposed to what I'm seeing on my side. So that was super helpful. Always made sure that the client predetermines who was in the group. And we would discuss it. Do you want intact teams? Do you want cross teams? Do you want them by roles and certain groups together? We would often talk about, is that going to create groupthink? Is that going to create a diversity opportunity? So, but they were the ones to determine who was in the group. Always allocate 2 hours. I did 15 minutes of the open of kind of those facts and skills, 90 minutes for the content, and always made sure I tried to have 15 minutes at the end to mine for those nuggets. And so one thing is, there's 2 really awesome videos in there. One of them sets up the simulation, and then the other one does kind of the big reveal of what the subject matter expert says for the stuff. I would say if you're running short on time, skip that second video and just do the manual update of, you know, what the results are, to make sure that you protect that 15 minutes at the back end to process what this, you know, what the learnings were. And again, this kind of circles back with my last comment here about finding out from the client what's a problem or issue that they're working on. And ultimately, when you think about the skills that you want them to demonstrate, you can potentially leverage the simulation pretty often to have those things come to life and have them practice them.
Great. Awesome, Mark. Thank you so much. Now what we'll do is see what questions have come in during your presentation. Allison, any questions you can share?
Thanks, Mary. Yes, we've had quite a few great questions come through. One question that has just been provided is, did you teach the skills first before the activity? Typically, I review the interpersonal skills after.
It's a really good question. I personally like to make sure I kind of teach somebody how to fly the plane before I stick them in the cockpit. And so I look at the simulation as a really great opportunity to practice what they just learned so that hopefully they have a higher probability of incorporating it and using it again, as opposed to they do the simulation and then I tell them, hey, well, if you would have done this, you would have had better luck. So I look at it as the simulation is a way to apply the skills that we're talking about. So that's my point of view on that.
Great, thank you. Another question that is very interesting is, how is creating an inclusive culture different from creating an inclusive climate?
Ooh, this is a big conversation that human synergistics is all about, culture versus climate, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I want to make sure I don't get too far out over my skis and talk out of turn. Ultimately, climate is really going to be dictated by the leader of that group. So I think you're bringing up a really great point. But ultimately, what we want to be able to see is those behaviors throughout the entire organization. And so, in a way, in my perspective, if I can get a leadership group to adopt certain behaviors that are going to enable inclusivity, then hopefully through the simulation where they get to try it on and see the actual difference, they will cascade those behaviors to their portions of the organization, and thus, making it more common throughout the entire organization as opposed to being isolated with just a group, which would dictate more climate than culture. And Allison, hopefully I summed that up, hopefully correctly.
Absolutely, and I would just follow up that climate will be much more perceptual, where though the culture is much more those unwritten rules. So just a simple way to think about it, but we can definitely follow up with that question. I also have had a ton of questions come through in regards to the size of the team. So any suggestions on your experiences, Mark?
Yeah, and in the facilitator guide that Human Synergistics put together, I think is really on point with 4 to 6 is kind of the key for these small groups. Having said that, I did do at least with the online version of the Digital Subarctic, we had a group of 40 because it was an entire office. And so that's where I was kind of getting at, do you want different kinds of roles? Do you want intact teams? But 4 to 6 is the sweet spot to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to weigh in without making it too cumbersome, or people can check out and sit back on their computer without being engaged. So I find that really worked out well. We did 5 in both of those.
Great. One last question, and I'll hand it back to Mary then, is what level of people have you used this with in your organization?
So the couple different times that we've done these, it varied. So like I said, the one in Boston, that was all of kind of a senior leadership team. The other one that had 40 was administrative people. It was the managing partner. It was training people. It was recruiters. It was a very, very diverse leadership group because they were rolling that into an end of quarter development conversation that they wanted to have kind of a way to incorporate all of the things that they had talked about into the quarter at the very end. And so we made this kind of a capstone event to highlight all of those things and to put them into practice. So I would say you could really do this with different levels because it also provides an opportunity for a senior leader potentially to jump into these different smaller groups and listen to the conversations that are also happening.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark. I'll hand it back to you, Mary.
Terrific. Thank you. Great questions, everyone. Now for our second case study. This one is about building a cohesive leadership team. I am delighted to introduce Gail Moat, a team coach, trainer, and consultant who helps teams become more cohesive and achieve amazing results. Prior to starting her own company in 1990, Gail worked for various manufacturing enterprises, including Del Monte and Quaker Oats. Additionally, Gail is an adjunct lecturer for the Tippie College MBA program. We're thrilled to have Gail join us today. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you, Mary. I'm excited to be with you. Teams are my jam, and I'm excited to share with you my experience in using the digital subarctic survival situation. The case study I'm going to share with you today is one that I did in October of this year. It was done actually in person, very socially distanced and everybody masked up. So I'll explain that, but I've also done this virtually with my MBA students, and I'm doing it currently virtually with an undergraduate group of students, and I plan to do it in a couple of months here with an intact virtual team of leaders. So I'm going to focus on this case study, but if you have questions about some of those other situations, I'm happy to address those. So this happened to be a leadership academy that our local corridor business journal put together. So people were nominated by their companies to be part of this. We had 22 participants. They ranged from the C-suite executives to entrepreneurs to mid-level managers to high potential leaders. They covered nonprofit to corporate to government. And in the corporate area, we had healthcare, we had marketing, we had software development, manufacturing, just a range of folks. And what I was challenged to do was in one 4-hour session, teach them how to be great at developing a cohesive leadership team. So the objective was really to help them learn how to do that and engage in healthy conflict and make good decisions. So the model that I used was Pat Lencioni's 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. And if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a pyramid of behaviors, and I'll just quickly explain it to you. It starts with building deep-seated vulnerability-based trust, so people feel they can be open and transparent with one another, so therefore they're more willing to engage in productive, constructive conflict. They're not having the meeting after the meeting. They're making sure that they're not holding back with their ideas and opinions, and therefore they're weighing in. So therefore they're more likely to buy in. If you reference back to Mary's K, quality times acceptance equals a good decision. So really helping them to understand, what does it take to make a decision that everybody can get behind, so that when you leave the meeting, you're more aligned, you can hold one another accountable and focus on the collective results of the team. So I explained that model to them, and then we started working on some of those skills. And particularly, I really suggest that whenever you use a simulation or a team building problem solving tool like this, you do a little bit of trust building regardless of how long the team's been together, because it's important for them to recognize that they need to be open and real with one another in what they're really thinking and feeling. So what I did with the team was I just did a quick thing called Personal Histories from Pat Lencioni's book. It started off with, where did you grow up? What's your birth order? Are you the oldest, youngest, in the middle? Also asked them, what was a unique challenge for you growing up, and what was your first job? Just to kind of lighten things up and getting them to be willing to be open with one another. Now, that said, if I have more time, and I think this is really important, I like to do conflict styles with the team members so that they come into this simulation better understanding how they feel when they disagree, because when they rank these items, they're not going to be on the same page. So it's really important that we do that. And human synergistics, their LSI conflict is a great tool to be able to do that, because it helps them to identify what are their productive behaviors, their destructive behaviors, and what do they bring to a conflict. How can they help the conflict? How do they sometimes negatively impact the conflict? That's a good thing. So the whole purpose of the digital subarctic was to focus on the conflict and commitment parts of this model. So to do that, the first thing I did was just introduce them to some conflict resolution techniques. So things like making sure that every voice is heard, considered, and understood, and what is the role of the leader, and being present and making sure that everybody is having an opportunity to share their point of view. So going through some conflict resolution techniques, I always show the classic Abilene paradox. group think and everybody going along to get along. And we also talked about Amy Edmondson's fearless organization and creating psychological safety. So the humble listening, the good questioning skills that you heard Mark refer to, I think all of those are really important. Just getting them thinking about what are the good behaviors that really good teams demonstrate to get this healthy conflict going. And by the way, understanding that conflict is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a necessary thing to get to that commitment piece. And then we do the subarctic. We do the simulation. So they understand that there will be conflict, that's a good thing, that they need to have clarity and commitment around their decisions. And so to help with that commitment piece, I also teach them a technique called 5-finger consensus. And we know that consensus doesn't mean agreement, it means 100% support. So I teach them how to use that so that they can kind of assess where everybody's at. 5, you strongly agree, 1, you strongly disagree. And I share with them, you have to get to 3, 4, or 5 before you can move forward. So everybody has to strongly agree, or can support. And teach them that process so that they can kind of keep everybody on the same page as they're working through the simulation. So let me now share with you some of the things that I've learned in terms of facilitating this. So Mary, if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. One of the things is certainly ensuring, if you're going to do this virtually, that you have breakout room capability. And most of the I think most of the platforms have that capability now. It is important to create the teams in advance, as Mark was alluding to. Here's my belief about teams. I think 5 to 7 is the sweet spot. Definitely less than 10. But here's the deal: the team that I'm going to be working with coming up here, there's 12 people on that team. I'm not going to split them up to do the simulation because they're going to be in a conference room together, all 12 of them making decisions going forward. So it would defeat the purpose of splitting them out. So I want them all to be together, and they're going to have to figure out those challenges of having more people in the room as they figure out how to do that. So think about what you're really trying to accomplish and what your objectives are. It is important to create the teams in advance. It's really exciting that Human Synergistics is going to be working on being able to set up those teams in the simulation in advance because that will be really helpful too. There's a team submitter as part of this simulation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the leader that the team selects, but that is the person who's going to be doing the dragging and dropping of the team ranking. And so I think it's really important that they're able to share their screen, whatever they're working on, so that the rest of the team members can see what's happening. And that's just an important lesson that I've learned. I like to have, when I'm doing this virtually, and even when I was doing it in person, everybody had their laptops. I like them to come in at least 20 minutes early. And the reason is, with firewalls and other things that people have going on, whether they're using company laptops or personal laptops, there's always some technology issue where people can't seem to get into it. So the more time you give them, the easier it is for you to help kind of troubleshoot and make sure that everybody's there to engage at the same time. Clear, simple, concise instructions, and one at a time. So here's what we're going to do first, then we're going to do that, here's what we're going to do next, so that people can follow along and they're anticipating well what's coming up. I like laptops rather than mobile phones and tablets, and the only reason is it's a lot easier for people to be able to see what's happening and not having to switch back and forth between screens. Links and instructions in chat. This is important because once you go to a breakout room, whatever the slide was, they're not going to be able to see it anymore. So I got very good about putting instructions into chat, like remember, you are not allowed to use outside resources, so you can't be going out on Google and searching for hints or any of those kinds of things. So I want you to use the participant tools. So when you're doing your individual ranking, give me a red check. If you're still working, a green check when you're done, because sometimes we'll say you have 10 minutes to do the individual ranking. Well, a lot of them will finish earlier than that. And then if you see that you have all green checks, just move, right? So that you can use more time for the rest of the simulation. I also make sure that they know who the leader is, who's going to be the spokesperson for the team, who's the team submitter, so they're all clear about those needs. Now, this next point is just something that I do. By the way, I do not do this with my MBA students because they've been with me for a much longer period of time. But for this particular case study, we only had 4 hours, and so you're kind of like a fire hose trying to teach them all of these team techniques. And so before I sent them off to do their team scoring, they had done their individual rankings, I did provide a little coaching to them. And what I said to them is this. So what you're going to want to do is look at each other and say, what did you have for number one? What did you have for number one? I said, don't do that. The first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what is our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And if we're all trying to survive, then what are the biggest threats to our survival? And talk about that and get some alignment around that. And then say, okay, what's our strategy? Are we staying? Are we leaving? What are we doing? And then once you've decided that, then start ranking the items. And I know some people say, well, Gail, you're teaching to the quiz, but that's really not what I'm doing, because like Mark said, I want to set them up for success. I believe in content, practice, debrief. Content, practice, debrief. So giving them the skills, giving them the tools, then letting them practice, then debrief what happened with that. So one of the things I do is just kind of share with them, here's some things I want you to think about. And then of course, before I send them off, I say, this is what you've been trained for, so make me proud here, right? This is what we've been doing. And the last thing I would say is this. I think sometimes as facilitators, we want to go, oh, good, now I can relax for 40 minutes or so while they do this team thing. What you want to do is you want to stay with them and like come in and out of the breakout rooms, or what I did when I had them all kind of spaced out in this big, huge ballroom, was go around to the various teams and just kind of observe. And Human Synergistics has a great observer survival guide too, where you can kind of, what are you looking for and what are you watching? So for example, one of the things I watch for is a team that might finish with like 15 extra minutes. That's kind of interesting. How'd you guys get through that so quickly? Or maybe I find a team that's rushing at the last minute to try to get things done. Or watching who's participating and who's not, and what's happening and what are the dynamics. And I just make personal notes of that for myself as we go into the debrief. So those are just some of the facilitation things I've learned. Now what I'd like to do on the next slide is share with you some of my best practices when it comes to using these. So before we do the scoring, so the team has come up with their team ranking and they're all excited about it and they can't wait to see, what the experts said. I say, before we do that, here's what I want you to do. I want everybody to write down individually 2 things. One thing that you were really proud about, what your team did really well, that you think really contributed to the success of working together, solving this problem, coming up with a team decision. And then one thing that you kind of noticed you struggled with. So for example, maybe you got organized really quickly, but then maybe you spent too much time on one item, or maybe you felt like, I think we got there, but boy, I really felt like there were 1 or 2 people that didn't contribute very much, or whatever you're noticing. And then before the scoring, I send them back to talk about that, so that they're all kind of talking about what they did well, what they didn't do well. Then I bring them back and we do the scoring. And I always make sure I ask for a spokesperson. And then of course at the team scoring, the team scores come up and you get congratulations if you got real synergy, which means everybody did better than even the person who did best by themselves. You get compliments if you did better than the average member of the team. And then condolences, obviously, if your team did worse as a team, which is we hope doesn't happen, but it does. And we always use it as a good learning opportunity. And once those team scores are up, then I go around and I have if it's multiple teams, I have each person kind of share, each spokesperson, what were their best practices, what worked, what didn't work. And then to make sure that this lives long beyond the simulation, I ask the teams, turn these behaviors into conflict norms. So that when the next time you're having a meeting, and this is especially true for intact teams, the next time you come into this conference room or the next time you're having a virtual meeting, put those conflict norms out in front of you, remember them, because those are the things that are going to help you do better as a team. And so in summary, and let's go to the next slide, Mary. In summary, what I'd just like to say is there's some really good things here that I think come out of these simulations. First of all, they learn how to create a more inclusive culture, right? Diversity and inclusion are not the same thing. You can have a lot of different talents and behaviors and personalities on a team, but if they don't learn how to tap into each other, then you're losing a lot of that benefit. They can make better, faster decisions because we've given them techniques and tools to learn how to get through that conflict and make those good decisions. They're all on the same page. There's no question about what they're going to do, and they've bought into that, and they accept that, and they believe that they did a better job as a team than they did individually, and they continue to come together as a team. So I have used the human synergistic simulations for years, and I find this digital one to be really, really great because it just speeds up so much too with the automatic scoring and the team scoring. So with that, I will open it up to questions. Mary Kay.
Terrific,
And Mary.
terrific, Gail. Yeah, that was really exciting, really great sharing. I'm going to hand it over to Allison. Any questions for Gail?
Yes, your enthusiasm and passion is so contagious, Gail. One question that came in is around
It's my jam.
the 12 participants on the team. So with that being a
Mhm.
fairly high number, how can you make sure that everyone is
Mhm.
able to share thoughts and opinions during the simulation? And how do you make sure that everyone will be able to speak up?
Yeah, well, that's more their responsibility than mine, but I will always remind them that, you know, the optimal, you're bigger than the optimal team size, and that's okay because you've decided that these are the people that absolutely need to be on this team for whatever reason. But what I think is important is they understand that a team makes sure that every person is heard, considered, and understood. So you've got to be present, and you have to be observing yourself, who's participating, who's not. When I said that, did that person not necessarily respond to me? And you know, when you're virtual, it's much more difficult. So you need to have the cameras on. You need to be able to be seeing one another and watching the dynamics of the group, not just worrying about what I'm saying and the person I'm talking to, but watching how other people are responding to you. So, you know, if you can do more practice, you know, with that and give each other some feedback, maybe that's helpful. But even if it's just something as saying, okay, we're just going to do a round robin a couple of times. So we're going to go around one at a time just to make sure that everybody's had a chance to weigh in, because otherwise you might have some of your more dominant personalities doing all the talking or the influentials like me that just get carried away. Hope I answered that.
Great. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Another question was around what are the challenges that teams experience in this exercise that you need to be prepared to address either during or after the simulation as a facilitator?
Yeah, thank you. Those are great questions. You know, one of them I think is time management. And you know, like Mark said, you know, I give 40 minutes just depending on the size. If there's going to be 12 people, I might even give them more time to do the team ranking. But one of the things is just kind of helping them with time management. So I tend to be a global timekeeper for the teams. So I might come in at the 15-minute mark or at the 25-minute mark or whatever, and just gonna say, okay, here's where we're at, just because otherwise sometimes they can lose track of that, or I'll ask them to assign their own timekeeper. Another challenge is going to be adapting and adjusting to the styles. That's why I like to do the conflict styles ahead of time, because they just can't help being themselves, right? So if I'm a perfectionist, you know, they're going to get way down in the weeds really fast, and they're going to stay there, and then other people are getting frustrated because, like, man, you know, we need to keep moving. So just reminding them to be aware of their styles and when they're helping and when they're not helping, and working through that. So the styles, the time management, and then I think, you know, just the point that you were making earlier, Allison, in the earlier question, is watching for the level of engagement, and keeping your eyes out for that. Those are probably three of the biggest ones that I'm watching for.
Excellent. Thanks for that feedback, Gal. Another question, and I'm sure you've had this over the years of using the tool, is what do you say to people who want to argue with the experts' answers?
Yeah. I really highly encourage, if you have enough time, to use human synergistics GSI, the group style inventory, in collaboration with the simulation, because that allows them to see the styles that the group styles that they brought in, what was constructive, what was passive, what was aggressive. And what I typically find is when they disagree with the experts, their affiliative scores are really high because, and their self-actualization scores, are really high because they created this really creative environment and they looked really out of the box at solutions and they really had a good time with each other, and they don't disagree, they disagree with the experts, but that's okay because they're still all aligned together. And so you can share with some of that. If they really disagree with the experts, my response to them is, okay, just stop. Whether you agree with the experts or not, let's talk about the process of how you work together. So forget about the scoring and whether you got compliments or condolences or any of those kinds of. Let's just talk about the dynamics in the group. That's really what you're trying to accomplish anyway. Of course, you might have some real competitive folks like my MBA students. It's like, no, because I wanted to be the #1 team in the room, and I have to understand that. But I think the experts do a good job of explaining why they chose the items that they did. So, I typically, maybe even share with them more of the responses than I typically would another team.
Excellent. Thanks, Gail. Mary, I'll hand it
Sure.
back to you.
Terrific. Great. Thank you, Allison. And thank you, everyone, for those really thoughtful questions for both of our speakers. At this point, I'd like to provide a quick summary here on, as we've talked about today and had some great case study examples and best practices, using a simulation like this, a survival simulation, is a great way to support your remote teams in how to stay connected, how to build their skills, how to link to other organizational priorities like leadership development or culture change initiatives, and how do we provide them with ways to learn together so that they can increase their ability to achieve synergy and quality outcomes. So with that, what we'd like to do next is one more poll. And in our poll, what we are asking for here is really, how would you like us to follow up with you? We've covered a lot of information and we want to make sure we provide you with the materials and support that is useful. So go ahead and we'll give you a few moments to answer the poll. See lots of activity, so that's terrific. We'll give another about 5-6 seconds, so feel free to submit your answers. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Thank you, everyone, for providing us with your preferences, and we'll be following up with you soon. So a little bit about this webinar drawing that we mentioned earlier. So after the webinar, we're going to be selecting 2 randomly selected attendees who will win a complimentary digital subarctic simulation kit. Each kit will be for up to 10 participants. So we'll announce the winners in our follow-up email. And so good luck, everyone. Now, I know we have just a few minutes left, and I'm thinking maybe we can cover just a couple more questions. Allison, any more questions that we can cover in this amount of time?
Sure. One question that came in was, during the simulation, the behaviors to observe, are those only the constructive ones, or is there a guide or something that can be used to observe?
Yes. So we have, I think even Gail mentioned it, we have a couple of things you can use. There is a survival observer's guide that provides you with a great reference point to look at rational and interpersonal skills. So it really helps you tune into how are they doing around the decision making and analyzing the situation and so forth, as well as are they listening? Are they over talking? Are they not participating? So that is one component. The other component is, and I think one of our speakers mentioned it as well, we have a group styles inventory that you can use to help really understand, are we being constructive, and how do we build those kinds of behaviors when we meet together versus more defensive styles, whether that's passive or aggressive. I hope I answered that question, Allison.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And this one kind of ties in with that question. Is there any right or wrong behavior or simply honest behavior which need to be worked with?
Right or wrong? I would say no. I mean, we are looking for people to be inclusive, to be respectful, to engage with each other. So I guess if you want to say right, it's more about being a team and being open to being part of a team and coming at it with some curiosity and knowing that, wow, I can learn from others as well as they can learn from me. So I would not say there's just one right way. It's more about how do we work together to achieve a better result. If you want to add anything to that, Allison, feel free, but that would be my take.
No, I second that, Mary. I think honest behavior is best and can really be reflected and observed, as Gail and Mark were mentioning. And so I would lean towards honest rather than right or wrong. But
Yeah,
moving them to more constructive behaviors is the ideal and what will be most effective for the teams.
definitely.
And I see another one that is it best that people have completed the LWS or one of our other tools before they do the simulation?
So on this one, I think what's important to know is we have a whole array of other assessments. Some of you that are new to human synergistics may not be aware, but we have a number of leadership assessments and individual development assessments. And the beauty is you can start anywhere. So if you want to start with the simulation, it can be a great way to begin working with teams and helping to educate them about constructive or defensive behaviors. Or in some cases, people do start with an individual 360 assessment and then realize, ooh, we'd really like to bring in some of the group styles and help them understand how they're interacting together. So I want to bring in Mary Kay here to see if you have anything to add on that, Mary Kay.
Thanks, Mary. No, I would agree with you. I think really you can start anywhere with the individual, with teams, or with leaders. And that's the beauty of working with the digital subarctic, because you can really apply it to any one of those groups and sort of tie it with content that you're already working with teams, or you can tie it with beautifully with the LWS, because you're talking about constructive behaviors. And so what are those constructive behaviors? And it just really helps to practice and to reinforce those behaviors and skills.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, Allison. Thanks, Mary Kay.
Great. The last question was, how much preparation time does it take to deliver the exercise?
Mary Kay, you want to take that one?
Sure, Mary. Really, the preparation time, I would always recommend at least becoming familiar with it for about a day, because it is being facilitated virtually. You have to understand the simulation and the facilitator, how to manage the other app to go in and out of the breakout rooms, to be working on a Zoom platform if it's not something that you're familiar with. I really like Mark's suggestion about adding the other credits so that you can see what the participants are seeing as well as what you're facilitating online. So I would say really to become comfortable with some of the materials and the resources, I would give yourself a day The talking points are super helpful, so you don't have to come up with that yourself. It just guides you through the entire simulation. And really the bulk of your time, I think, as Gail had mentioned, is really looking at the team and group dynamics. So all those like nuggets that Mark talked about, really pulling that out for discussion, because that's really where you're going to find the value in the digital subarctic, is talking about, well, what did you find happened in your group? What kind of skills did you use? Or what kind of things were standing in your way why you couldn't achieve that team synergy? So yeah, so I would say to give yourself a day to become familiar with all the technology as well as the facilitation materials.
Terrific. Sounds great. Perfect. Thank you, Mary Kay, and thank you, Allison, for assisting us with those questions. Well, everyone, I can't believe it. An hour has flown by. We want to thank all of you for joining us, and we will be following up with you soon. And please stay safe and have a wonderful, successful year in 2021. Take care, everyone.